They say the galaxy trembles when a human steps onto the battlefield. Today, we're about to find out why. The professor's voice echoed through the lecture hall, its cold timbre slicing through the murmurs of the assembled aliens. Rows upon rows of students from across the galaxy sat with their gazes fixed on the elder. The professor, a towering figure with skin like burnished metal, paced slowly across the stage. His 3 eyes focused intently on the crowd. "Humans," he began, "are a species driven by a unique blend of fearlessness and recklessness. Their strategies, crude by our standards, often succeed where our most advanced tactics fail. Today, we will dissect one such encounter. The Battle of Ninthar 7. A clash that changed the tide of the war and established humanity's reputation as the galaxy's fiercest warriors." The screen behind him flickered to life, displaying a barren planet. The sky was a toxic yellow, choked with ash and smoke. Below, scattered human forces huddled in trenches, surrounded on all sides by the enemy. On this day, the human forces were outnumbered 3-1. Their enemies, the Boskin, had them cornered, weapons trained on their positions. The logical course would have been surrender or retreat, but as we'll see, logic often plays a secondary role in human tactics. The professor clicked a button, and the screen zoomed in on a group of human soldiers. Their armor was battered, scarred by countless battles. Their leader, Captain Harris, stood among them. Harris was a man of few words. He knew the situation was dire, but he also knew his men. He didn't waste time on speeches. Instead, he issued a single command: hold the line. The students shifted in their seats, leaning forward. The professor continued. The Boskin advanced, their ranks swarming like locusts. Their weapons cut through the air, vaporizing everything in their path. But the humans held. They fought with a ferocity that defied logic, withstood an onslaught that should have wiped them out. On the screen, the battle played out in brutal detail. Explosions ripped through the trenches, sending dirt and debris flying. The human soldiers fired back, their guns blazing, but it was clear they were being pushed to the brink. The Boskin pressed on, their sheer numbers overwhelming the defenders. "Why didn't they retreat?" a student asked, his voice quivering with confusion. The professor paused, his eyes narrowing. "Humans," he said, "do not retreat. Not when their backs are against the wall. They dig in, they fight harder, and they become more dangerous." Harris knew this. He exploited it. The screen focused on Harris again. His eyes scanned the battlefield, planning. Then, without warning, he ordered a charge. His men hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then they followed, surging over the trenches and into the teeth of the Boskin forces. The room gasped as the screen showed the humans crashing into the enemy lines. It was madness. The Boskin had the advantage in every way, yet the humans fought like demons, tearing through their ranks with brutal efficiency. Harris knew that the Boskin relied on their numerical superiority, the professor explained, but he also knew that they were unprepared for such a reckless assault. By charging, he shattered their cohesion, turning their strength into a weakness. The screen displayed the chaos that ensued. Boskin soldiers fell in droves, their formations collapsing under the heavy human assault. It was brutal, primal, and effective. The human soldiers pushed through, breaking the Boskin lines, sending them into disarray. When the Boskin command realized what was happening, it was too late. The human forces, though vastly outnumbered, had gained the upper hand. The Boskin retreated, their morale shattered. The screen froze, capturing the moment of victory. The humans stood among the ruins of their enemies, bloodied but unbowed. The professor turned back to his students. "This, class, is what makes humans so dangerous. It's not their technology or their tactics. It's their will. Their refusal to surrender, to give up even when the odds are against them. This is what makes the galaxy tremble when they take the field." The room fell silent, the weight of the lesson sinking in. The professor let the silence hang, then moved to the next part of his lecture. "Now, let us delve deeper into the psychology of these warriors. How does one inspire such devotion, Such blind loyalty in the face of certain death. Captain Harris had no superior technology, no strategic advantage. What he had was the understanding that his men would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. The screen shifted, displaying images of human soldiers. To understand humans, one must understand this. They fight not for conquest or glory, but for survival. And when pushed to the edge, they become the most formidable force in the galaxy. Your creative journey now awaits. Get started now. The students remained captivated, their alien minds struggling to comprehend the sheer audacity of what they had just witnessed. The professor, satisfied with the impact of his words, prepared to move on to the next chapter of his lecture. The Battle of Ninthar 7 was only the beginning, the professor continued. In the months that followed, the Boskin launched several more assaults, each time more desperate to break the human forces. But each time, they were met with a resistance that defied reason. The screen displayed a series of images, each one capturing moments of intense combat. Human soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, standing their ground against waves of Boskin attackers. The professor pointed to one of the images, showing a group of humans huddled in the ruins of a once grand city. This was the Siege of Avernus, a pivotal moment in the campaign. The Boskin had surrounded the city, cutting off all supply lines. The humans were trapped, starving, with no hope of reinforcement. Yet they held out for weeks, refusing to surrender. The students watched as the screen showed the conditions inside the city. The humans were gaunt, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. They scavenged for food, fought over scraps, but they never lost sight of their mission. Captain Harris was there, leading from the front, the professor explained. He knew the city couldn't hold forever. So, he devised a plan, one that would turn the tide of the war in their favor. The screen zoomed in on Harris, his face without emotions. Harris understood the Boskin psychology. He knew they believed the humans were on the brink of collapse. So, he played into their expectations, letting them believe that the humans were weakened, desperate. A student raised a hand, his voice tinged with curiosity. But weren't they desperate? How could Harris gamble on such a risky plan? The professor nodded, acknowledging the question. Indeed, the humans were desperate. But desperation, in the hands of a skilled leader, can be a powerful weapon. Harris knew that the Boskin would launch an all-out assault, believing the humans to be vulnerable. What they didn't anticipate was that the humans had prepared for this. The screen shifted to the night of the final assault. The Boskin forces, confident in their impending victory, stormed the city in overwhelming numbers. But as they entered the streets, they found themselves caught in a labyrinth of traps, ambushes, and carefully placed explosives. Harris turned the city into a death trap, the professor said, his tone laced with respect. The Boskin walked right into it, their numbers working against them as they became easy targets in the confined spaces. The humans, familiar with the terrain, struck with surgical precision. The battle played out on the screen, a brutal display of human ingenuity and tenacity. The Boskin forces, so confident in their victory, were decimated. The city became a graveyard for their army, the streets littered with the bodies of their fallen soldiers. When dawn broke, the Boskin were in full retreat, the professor continued. The humans, against all odds, had held the city. The victory was not just a tactical success, it was a psychological one. The Boskin, once so sure of their superiority, were now questioning their ability to defeat these seemingly unstoppable humans. The screen displayed the aftermath of the battle. The humans stood among the ruins, battered but unbroken. Their victory was hard-won, but it had come at a great cost. The city was in ruins and many of their comrades had fallen. Yet there was no mourning, no despair. Only the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Harris and his men knew that the war was far from over, the professor said. But they had made their mark. The galaxy was beginning to take notice. The humans, once considered a minor threat, were now seen as a force to be feared. The students watched in silence, their minds racing to process the information. The professor let the images linger for a moment longer, then turned to face the class. Why do you think the humans succeeded where so many others have failed? he asked, his voice challenging. Why did they? A species with inferior technology and fewer resources managed to outmaneuver and outfight a superior enemy. One of the students hesitated, then spoke. Because they fight with everything they have. They don't hold back. The professor nodded. Exactly. Humans fight with a ferocity that comes from a deep-seated need to survive. They don't fight for glory or conquest. They fight because they must. And when pushed to the brink, they become something more than just soldiers. They become survivors. The screen faded to black, leaving the students with the weight of the professor's words. The lesson was clear: to underestimate humanity was to invite destruction. We have one more chapter to cover, the professor said, his voice softening slightly. But I warn you, what you're about to see is not for the faint of heart. The final confrontation between Harris and the Boskin commander is one of the most brutal battles in galactic history. But it is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He paused, letting the anticipation build. Prepare yourselves, class. The final lesson is about to begin. The screen flickered back to life, revealing the barren wasteland of Ninthar 7. The professor's voice, now tinged with a somber tone, filled the room. The Boskin, driven by desperation and the need to reclaim their lost honor, launched one final assault on the human forces. They gathered every available unit, every remaining soldier, and threw them into the fray. Their objective was simple: eliminate the human threat once and for all. The screen focused on the Boskin commander, a massive figure clad in ornate armor, his eyes burning with hatred. This is Karath, the Boskin most feared warrior. He was tasked with leading the final assault, and he vowed to crush the humans under his heel. The scene shifted to the human camp. The soldiers were preparing for the inevitable clash. Captain Harris stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Harris knew this would be their last stand, the professor said. But he wasn't afraid. He had faced death before, and he knew that fear would only cloud his judgment. Instead, he focused on the task at hand: survive. Defend. Defeat the enemy. The students watched as the final battle began. The Boskin forces, numbering in the thousands, descended upon the human position like a tidal wave. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, held their ground, their guns firing, their battle cries filling the air. Karath believed that his superior numbers would overwhelm the humans, the professor explained. But he underestimated their will to fight. Harris had positioned his men strategically, using the terrain to his advantage. The Boskin, blinded by their rage, walked right into his trap. The screen showed the chaos of battle. Explosions rocked the battlefield, sending debris flying in all directions. The humans fought with a fury that defied belief, their movements precise, their shots lethal. The Boskin, despite their overwhelming numbers, struggled to gain ground. Karath grew frustrated, the professor said, his voice rising. He could not understand how these humans, so few in number, could resist his might. So, he did what all commanders do when faced with defeat. He sought out the enemy leader. The screen zoomed in on Karath as he cut through the human ranks, his eyes locked on Harris. The professor's voice grew tense. This was the moment of reckoning. Harris knew that if he could defeat Karath, the battle would be won. But he also knew that Karath was a formidable opponent, one who had never been defeated in single combat. The students held their breath as the screen showed the two commanders facing off. Karath, towering over Harris, roared in challenge. Harris, undaunted, raised his weapon, his eyes cold. What happened next is the stuff of legend, the professor said, his voice barely above a whisper. Karath charged, his blade flashing in the light. But Harris was ready. He sidestepped the blow, using Karath's momentum against him. Then, with a single, well-placed shot, he brought the Boskin commander to his knees. The screen showed Karath falling, his armor cracked, his expression one of disbelief. Harris stood over him, his weapon pointing on the defeated commander. Instead of delivering the killing blow, Harris did something unexpected, the professor continued. He lowered his weapon and spoke. What he said has been lost to history, but it was enough to break Karath's spirit. The Boskin, seeing their leader defeated, fled the battlefield in disarray. The screen faded to black, leaving the students in stunned silence. The professor turned to face them, his expression grave. Humans, as you have seen, are not to be underestimated. They are not the strongest, nor the most technologically advanced. But they possess a willpower that is unmatched in this galaxy. And that, more than anything else, is what makes them so dangerous. The room remained silent as the professor gathered his notes. The lesson was over, but the impact of his words would linger. "Remember this, class," the professor said as he prepared to leave. "The galaxy trembles when a human steps onto the battlefield. And now you know why." With that, he exited the lecture hall, leaving his students to ponder the lessons of humanity's resilience, their ingenuity, and their unmatched will to survive.